off. And if you've any questions, pop them in the chat box, and I'll keep an eye on the chat box as well. So we want questions, and if you even can't get the point across about the question in writing, you can even say I have a question, and I'll bring you into the chat. Then you can ask a question if you want. So we definitely want participant feedback and interaction. It's just if we have mics on and off, and you'll have a dog barking in the background, and you'll hear a lawnmower and stuff somewhere else, and it gets a bit out of control. So we'll just try to keep the mics and the cameras off, and then as the questions come in, pop them in the question box, and I'll pose them to Mick, or he'll pose them to me, and we'll roll on that way. Right, we'll get going. So that's the housekeeping. And what we're starting here this evening, guys, is a youth athletic development webinar series. I suppose where this came from was myself and Mick. We were tasked with developing an S&C workshop as part of the Kildare GEA coach education webinar program. And when me and Mick sat down, stage one, there wasn't enough room on the A4 page to detail all the ideas and all the different areas that we wanted to go into. So from that, then we said we'd start with the youth. I suppose the youth is in athletic development in this age group is extremely important, and it's probably in the GA setting it has been a little bit neglected in these webinar series. So we said there's a bit of a niche in the market there, and the response so far has been excellent. So it kind of shows that people are after this information. And then secondly, we found that one workshop wasn't going to cut it. So we decided to start with 5. And as we get feedback and as everyone interacts in the workshops, if there's a need to go into other areas, we're more than happy to build them as well. So we'll be looking for feedback as we go along throughout the program. So I suppose we'll get started. So just an introduction myself. My name's Paul Divley. My role in Kildare is I'm the athletic development performance GDA, or we have a different title every year, but I'm kind of over the athletic development aspect of coaching and games, and then Michael Gaelic is currently the Leaks of GA Games Promotion Officer. Both of us would have an interest in S&C, working with teams across Maynooth University and with various development squads and Kildare teams and the likes. Did I add in everything there, Mick? Did I miss anything?
Yeah, no, that's good, Paul. You just I'm a GPO in Leakslip, and my home club is Maynooth, so I have to get that one in there as well, Paul. You know.
Yeah, very good. Other than that, I suppose in relation to athletic development, or where me and Mick are coming from, and I suppose it's where we've had a few good chats about it. We're probably coming from to GA first, and to strength and conditioning or athletic development second. And the two of us, as we talk, we think this has stood to us and put us in a good place of where we see strength and conditioning and athletic development as part of the overall concept. So hurling and football always come first. Both of us would have played hurling and football. I think, Mick, you hung up the football boots a while ago, but you're still at the hurling, are you?
Yeah, no, I was actually asked to give up the football boots and just stick to the hurling. So,
but in that sense, I suppose we'd see the games as across the board. We'd see all aspects of the game as really important, and I suppose we're not coming from that kind of concentrated section of sports science and S&C. We're kind of coming into that late, and I think it's given us a good wholesome view of how the game should be looked at in a coaching capacity. Right, so we'll kick on. Hopefully these slides work for us now this evening. Okay, so as you would have seen in the advertisement of the webinar, we're going to be running 5 workshops, and as detailed in those workshops, each night is going to have its own set agenda. This is the aims and objectives of this evening's workshop, and we'll touch on the rest of the webinar series aims and objectives as we get closer to the end of the workshop tonight. So this evening, the aims of tonight, what we're hoping we can get across to you is have a chat about the development status of the youth athlete. So we're looking at the age grade of 13 through to 18, and we're just going to kind of give a brief helicopter overview of the different areas that we have to pay attention to or think about when we're dealing with that player. The next one is outline the match play demands of youth Gaelic football and hurling. And this is probably the nuts and bolts of what this evening's about. So before we get into we should do this training or we should do that training or this is what's important and that's what's important, really what tonight's about is, well, can we define what youth Gaelic football and hurling is in a physical capacity? Okay, and we're going to spend a good bit of time talking about that and kind of painting the picture of what demands are placed on the player during these games. And then the last part, really, from the detail we find in our presentation on the demands of the game, we're going to let that direct where we're going to prioritize athletic development going on into the next number of webinars. Okay, so Mick is I'm going to hand over to Mick. He's going to take us through the development status of the youth athlete. Again, we're talking about how the workshop's going to go. Me and Mick will be interjecting on each other and giving comment and all that. So we'll be kind of having a conversation as it goes along. And just to repeat again, if you've any questions, feel free to put them into the question box, and I'll keep an eye on that. If you can't find the question box, the way it works is if you hover over the screen, you'll see a little speech bubble come up. That'll bring you to a conversation section and you can type in your question or your answers there. So off we go. Over to you, Mick.
Perfect. Thanks, Paul. So I'll just move on to the next slide there, Paul. Cheers.
Yeah.
So guys, as Paul has stated in the first aim of this evening's workshop, it's obviously really important for us to know who we're coaching, and knowing who we're coaching is basically the development status of our players. So many factors that influence the development of our players and how they perform on the pitch, the training pitch, and during games. And as you can see here, what we've just discussed on is it's important to acknowledge their academic stage and the transition from primary school into secondary school into exam cycles, and all the different challenges that come with them change in environments for the players. Really, really important to acknowledge these different areas of the development status. And then we can pop down and we have a little look at while the boys and the girls are moving into secondary school, for example, come new friends, possibly new interests, a loss of interest of football and hurling, behavioural changes. Their coachability might change as their behavioural changes. So all these things that we have to consider, and they all play a massive, massive role in how we coach our players and how we would like to help them develop to perform to the best of their ability. The focus of this webinar series is obviously athletic development. So if we look at the table on the screen, we can see up the top growth rate, PHV. So basically what PHV stands for is peak height velocity. And in its simplest terms, it is the accelerated growth spurt that the teenagers go through in its simplest terms. And while they're going through these accelerated growth spurts, there could be changes in their performance. So we as coaches have to be ready and acknowledge and be able to acknowledge when this is happening in front of us, so that if we have a player coming right the way up through, we can notice any differences and we can look and we can kind of go, okay, what factor could possibly be influencing these differences? Down the bottom of your screen, you will see the physical training, the muscle strength, the aerobic capacity, and the anaerobic output. All of these elements, all of these components of the development of the player comes from an International Olympic Committee study, and states that we have an opportunity to develop muscle strength, we have an opportunity to increase aerobic capacity, and we also have a potential to increase anaerobic output as well. So therefore, it brings us to the importance of developing these areas of athletic development. So I just see a question there coming through. Would the PHB be the same for female players to male? No, female players will generally go through their peak height velocity slightly before the male players will go through it. So then at the very, very bottom of the graph, you will see sporting performance, and you'll see we have fluctuating. So I'm sure everybody can appreciate that as the players are going through their whole careers, but then in particular through the youth stage, there's going to be a fluctuation in sporting performance. And it could be a result of any of the factors above here, could be contributing to that difference in sporting performance. So that's just a very simple helicopter view of the development status of our players. really, really important that we know who we're coaching to get the most out of them. Okay. So Paul, if you have anything to add to that particular table there before we move on?
No, I suppose when we look at it in this capacity, we've a lot to consider, and we can't get lost in this either. Like, that kind of way. I suppose is to be aware of it, or if the example, I suppose, the peak height velocity, or even behavioral changes. It's kind of just, let's be aware that if someone has a big change in how they're acting or performing, physically, performance-wise, or mood-wise, generally we can find, if we try track it back, we're going to see something's changed. So they could have gone through puberty, they could be trying to assert themselves independently in a psychological capacity, and they could have gone through peak high velocity, and all of a sudden their femurs are after growing, and they're after losing all sorts of coordination and awareness, and they were very tidy footballers, and now they're all over the place and they look like a baby giraffe trying to run around the place, so it's kind of, with that in mind, we probably don't react as quickly to any dips or any changes in performance. We kind of let them kind of roll out, and then if they persist and there's any major issues, we'll intervene. We probably let them just, let's see how this rolls another while, and simple stuff, and it can feed in, and it's probably not where we're going tonight, but stuff as simple as, if he goes out of form, he still deserves his place on the pitch or on the team and stuff like that. That we're not very quick to remove them from their starting position and stuff like that. But again, we're probably going to talk about that over the next coming webinars. But that presentation, or that slide, is a nice little overview of it. So I'll kick on, will I?
Yeah, perfect. Yeah. So guys, this just brings us on then to the next slide here that we have. And as we can see, it has us side by side. It has us building the player side by side to a plant, and all the different elements that a plant needs. And we kind of feel that it's a really good analogy to see these two in front of us here, that if you remove any of the elements to our left, the plant is not going to have all that it needs to nourish and grow. The same could be when we're building the player. So we have to take into account all the different aspects of what brings into developing the player in a whole. And physical development is just a cog in that wheel. It's an important cog, but it is just an important one cog in the wheel. Okay, so this,
Mick, you have another question to answer. You've opened up a can of worms on peak height velocity. Can PHV happen beyond the age of 16?
Peak height velocity generally will happen up until about 15, but there is potential for it to go a little bit further into it, depending on the players. But generally speaking, it will happen between your 15, 16 is when it will happen. Generally speaking, there's another growth in relation to muscle strength that happens a little bit later on. But generally speaking, the peak height velocity, that accelerated growth spurt, will happen up to about 15, 16.
And I'll put you on the spot again. Maddie Brady from Ulster's come in and says, are you using any method of tracking or measuring peak height velocity?
Interesting one, Maddie. Yeah, so measuring peak height velocity, it's quite time consuming for coaches to be measuring peak height velocity going forward. We have to be measuring their sitting height versus their standing height going forward. It is a tricky enough data to get in relation that we have to be consistent in our measuring over a set period of time. So it can be a little bit tricky in relation to our access to the players and getting the data that we need on a consistent basis to predict the actual peak height velocity accurately.
And to add to that, having the knowledge won't actually differ much of our training model. We kind of react based on performance or any issues we see, as opposed to kind of saying, oh, he's due to hit this zone in the next stage, so he's going to change his program. We kind of react depending on how they are performing, as opposed to what we're expecting to happen, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so we're kind of taking that view that this is when the potential is there to happen, and that we just have to be aware of it, is generally the angle that we're taking on that one.
Yeah, that is
okay. Perfect. So we can click on to the next slide, Paul. So perfect, guys. So basically, as coaches in Kildare, we might be looking and we might be saying what support is there to assist you in developing your players. Well, There's obviously assistance from all the Kildare staff, GPOs, GDAs throughout the county. Obviously, we're working in clubs, but the shared goal of all Kildare GAA staff is to improve the standards county-wide and keep driving the standards up so that the county players feeding into the county setups is constantly improving. So that's the shared goals. And there's also the Leinster GAA Tourist Player Pathway. So it's a coaching framework used by coaches to develop players. And then obviously Leinster GAA's resistance training course. And resistance training is of huge importance to the development of our players. For the focus of this workshop, for this series of webinar, we're going to focus just on the conditioning of our players. But if anybody would have an interest in exploring a little bit more about resistance training and the benefits and how to implement it, the GAA resistance training course is available to roll out in your clubs.
Yeah, and just to add to that, particularly the one of the assistance from the staff in the county, particularly the clubs or the coaches on this webinar from the county, you're never going to annoy or bother or put anyone out that's working for Kildare by asking them to support you in any aspect of this. You know, we all have different skills and abilities, but there's a huge amount of GDAs and GPOs with a huge amount of experience in athletic development and youth athletic development, and I'm sitting on top of all that. So we're only looking for engagement from the club coaches in this area, really, and it's a big area that we want to push this year. So it's kind of coming away from this. If you don't take anything else, this is a very strong point that we'd like you to follow up on. If it's an area that you're unsure of or any part of this coming out of it, or you want to learn more, really just ask the question or drop the text or make the phone call or the email, whatever you have to do. Okay.
Perfect. Yeah. So I'm sure everybody can relate to this slide. I think we've all been these soldiers. So the general, we are not fit enough. That's why we didn't win. As I said, I'm sure we can all relate to that comment. And the question that I posed this evening is, have we ever actually taken a step back and said what fit enough actually is? And then how do we get our players there? So that leads us on to the next part of the webinar series. It's the step one in getting there. It's the importance of understanding the demands of our games, because we need to understand the demands of the games in order that we can get our players fit enough so that that we can develop them, that this statement is something that we can try and steer a little bit away from. Okay, that's it, Paul. Thanks.
Okay. Right, guys. So the next phase is we're going to review a couple of academic papers on Gaelic, and then we're going to review a couple of academic papers on hurling that discuss or explain and detail the demands of the game in each sport. The reason we're going to do them individual, and there'll probably be a small bit of repetition in this, but we think it's important that we actually make a clear distinction between the two sports, and we don't try and merge them together just out of convenience, because they do have subtle differences, but it's important that we're aware of the differences. So if you're here and you're coming from football, each side will only be about 5-10 minutes. Okay, so endure them if you have to. Okay, another thing on these, they are for 3 slides, they are a little bit graph and number heavy. I'm going to share this document with you afterwards, and we'll share detail of all the papers we've pulled from. So if it doesn't click with you this evening, even when you read over them afterwards, it should be quite should be easy to understand. And then after that, really, again, why we're doing this and why we're showing it is we just want you to see the overview of what are the players experiencing in the match, and this is why we're going on to web. So if there's any issues or you're not sure of that in the next few slides, just pop the question in the box again. Okay, so the first task we're going to do, and I'm hoping the video plays. I spent a lot of time trying to pull this video down from the internet and get it to work. Our fingers are crossed. If it doesn't work for you, don't worry, you won't lose the impact of the workshop. Okay, so all I'm going to ask you to do when we think physical fitness or athletic development or that whole aspect of the kind of athletic side of the game, I'm going to ask you to watch this 2-minute clip, and I'm going to ask you to take note on anything that stands out to you, or any patterns or anything you see, or even a description of the movements of the players in the game. Okay, you can pick a section of the pitch, you can follow the ball, and you can follow a player, whatever you want to do, but scribble down a few notes. Okay, and then afterwards I'll do a quick overview of what we saw. Okay, this is just kind of an icebreaker, or not so much an icebreaker, kind of a view on what's happening in the football match. Okay, so hopefully that played for as many as possible. There probably was a few that it didn't work for, but really, this isn't really going to pay too much lead into our workshop or our discussion. But if we, I suppose the key points, if we follow the ball there, so if we are watching RT and we're watching the regular camera view, we can get a view that Gaelic football is an extremely high intensity game with a lot of contact. Players are going 100 miles an hour, and it's just flat out. Okay, when we see this view of a stationary camera at a high angle looking down the field, if I kept my eyes on the inside Dublin full forward line and Kerry full back line, bar the first 18 seconds when Kieran Kilkenny got a score, they walked and stood still for most of that time. Okay, and when the ball was, or when the people were around the ball, generally the intensity of the play picked up. But outside of that, if the ball was coming down the left wing, the right wing was generally a pretty low intensity activity. All right, and all we're trying to detail here, what we're going to go through in the next few slides, is we're going to describe the demands and what's actually occurring in the game. And we're also going to explain how this kind of a model of a low intensity, high intensity actually allows the high intensity, high impact activities to occur. Does that make sense, Mick?
Yeah, perfect. And we actually have a very good comment coming in there from Rory Jacob. It's his comment coming in was lots of lateral and linear movements with intermittent bursts of speed. So it's a really good summary of the clip as well, different areas of it. So yeah, really, really good on that. Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay, so we're going to go on next to the studies that we looked at for this. Okay, so again, hopefully we don't lose too many in this model, but what we did is we've critiqued two papers, or we reviewed two papers. All right, so the two papers were an under 18 study by Brian Cullen, the Dublin Athletic Development Director. He measured 85 players from 3 clubs and 3 county teams. they recorded 17 matches, and they looked at the GPS and heart rate, or recorded GPS and heart rate in those 17 competitive matches. They also recorded physiological profile and VO2 max, or aerobic capacity, and that was more so just so they could actually correlate their findings to other studies across different sports. Also then, to get the younger age of the youth, we've also looked at the under 15 age group in football. So Brian Riley, he performed a study on a county talent academy. Okay, there was 6 matches in that study, and they followed the exact same protocol, or they followed the same GPS and heart rate. Okay, and we're going to present the findings that they found to detail what the game is. Okay, so the measurements that they recorded, so they would have tracked the total distance the player performed, the speed zones that these distances were performed in, the percentage of time that was spent in each of these zones, the number of sprints, the length of sprints, and the accelerations and decelerations. All right, so this is giving us a good overview concept of the running performance that a player has to be able to achieve in these 2 settings of under 18 football and under 15 football. Okay, this next slide, and are the slides still running all right, Mick? If they're not,
yeah, perfect. Yeah, perfect. Yeah.
Okay, so this next slide is a GPS graph of a player performing in a game. Okay, the blue line is a continual line, and as the time goes along, so we can see time along the bottom. So it starts at 2 o'clock, 2:10, 2:20, and so on, and rolls on. The big gap in the middle is half time. But as the line squiggles up and down and up and down and up and down, that's actually detailing the speed that the player was in during that run. So if we follow it there around 2 minutes, he's down below. Sorry, I'll add in these as well. So let's go back. So that blue line is continual tracking up and down. He's going up the speeds. He's changing the gears. He's coming back down. He could be side shuffling. He could be walking. He could be pushing. He could be shoving. He could be doing anything. But this GPS just keeps a kind of pin on him the whole game. And as he increases his speed, that line goes up. And as he decreases his speed, that line comes down. Now, how we use this to develop a study or to categorize what they did is we just box off the speeds that the player performed in. So every time the line goes into the next box, he's categorized it running in a different intensity zone. So you can see zone 1 is up to 6.9 kilometers an hour. Zone 2 is up to 12 kilometers an hour, and so on, all the way up to zone 4, which is 17 to 21.9 kilometers an hour, and then zone 5 is 22 kilometers an hour and higher. Okay, so this is just a visual so you can understand how the studies are composed and measured. It is a live GPS, or the GPS that was recorded from a National Football League game this year. It would have been a senior one, and the player would have recorded over 9 kilometers, but that's not relevant really for us to see. Okay, so what do we find from all this information and putting GPSs on and heart rate on lads? Okay, so the first thing we'd have, and we've seen this across some advertisements, I think for Energizer and the likes of that, they always state the distance that the players perform in these games. Okay, so we've looked at the 2 age groups. So the under 18 age, the Cullen study, the lads would have, or the team average would have been 5,774 meters per game, and then the under 15 is very similar. Okay, so just 40 meters in the less. Okay, and then the distance, then we can see across the positional variance. So from full back right through to full forward, we have a measurement of each distance that the players cover. You can see that the middle section, the half back, midfield, and half forwards perform the most distance, and then the inside lines perform less distance. And that would just be the demands of the game and kind of responding to where the ball is in the pitch. So it spends more time out around the middle, so that requires the players around the middle to run more. Okay, so that gives us an overview, but what do we do with that total distance? Not a lot. Okay, so the next thing what they broke down is they went into describing how much time was spent in each zone. So you can see a huge amount of time was spent in the zone 1 stage. So that was up to, I think, 75% of the game time was spent below 7 kilometers an hour. And you can see that the percentage of time decreases as the intensities increase. Okay, we're going to talk next, and the area we were most interested in And the area that has most relevance to success in the game is going to be the top two. Okay, so approximately 4% of game time is going to be the making and breaking of the game. Not to say that the lower sections aren't important, but the game breaking activities and the activities that we're going to address in these webinars will have a big focus on the top two zones. Again, if I've lost anyone or anyone has any questions, feel free to put the questions into the question box. Okay, so the next slide I have here, this is detailing those top two zones. All right, so what I have is zone 4 is the blue. Okay, so that's high speed running over 17 kilometers an hour. And zone 5 is the orange, very high speed running, and that's the orange, and that's over 22 kilometers an hour. So this is, again, in those games, they found that the team average for high speed running, so from 70 to 22 kilometers an hour, was 851 meters. And then you can see the positional variance. So you can see, again, that in around the middle third, that they're covering more speed. And then when we look at the very high speed running, so that's the sprinting, you'll see that they're covering about 200 meters was the team average. And again, midfield performed the most high speed running. All right. But I suppose it's closer. The very high speed running is closer across all positions than the high speed running. And that's because there is an onus on full forwards and full backs to hit those speeds as well. Okay. So again, what does that mean? These reps are not completed in one go. So no player goes and runs a high speed continuously and hits those markers. They're recorded over multiple reps. Okay, and this is the reps of sprints. So this is in relation to the orange, the 22 kilometers an hour. So what we have here is the team average for sprints was 18 sprints per game. Each sprint generally took 3.35 seconds, and the sprint distance was generally approximately 21 meters. Okay, we can see that the defenders sprinted less in regard reps, and the midfielder sprinted the most. Okay, the next one we have, and again, if I've lost anyone, pop in a question. The next one we have then, and this is a very interesting study. So this study here was done by the max speed that the players achieved during a match. All right, so this was a study done in the Ulster Championship in 2019. And what they found is across the full Ulster Championship, I think they were tracking the Down and Monaghan team for this study. Ryan McLaughlin performed this study. They found that the team average per game was 31.2 kilometers an hour. And then the midfielder again hit the highest speed at 31.4 kilometers an hour. Okay, so again, what does this tell us? The players have to perform multiple sprints, and they actually have to perform surprisingly fast. So 31.4 kilometers is very fast for a team sport athlete. Okay, and we just have to be aware of this, that we have to try expose the players to these speeds and to this number of reps of sprints in our training to ensure that they're ready for the demands of the game. Okay, and then the very last one is positional a variation on accelerations. Okay, so again, we see 188 accelerations. Sorry, firstly, before I go on to the numbers of accelerations, we need to know what an acceleration is. So an acceleration is defined as a sudden increase in speed. So it could be you were jogging along and then you accelerated into a higher speed. So that can occur across any zone. That could be zone 1 right through to zone 5. An acceleration can occur, and they generally actually occur between zone 1 and zone 3, the lower speed into the higher speed to initiate a high speed action. Okay, so in that, the team average was 188, with the midfield again maxing out at 227 accelerations. Okay, so they are very important to be aware of as well. So if we're performing these movements 188 times on average in a game, it's very important that we acknowledge and train these and make sure that the players are able to perform these very well. And to add, Mick?
No, I just think just to zone in on the max speed there, when we were dissecting these different studies, it was something that was really stood out to us. Like, if you really think about it, 31 kilometers an hour during a team sport for minor players it's very, 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 very fast. So the need to train speed in our training sessions is clear as day when we have the data in front of us like that. Our players being exposed to that sort of speed during game time with various different elements that could be influencing fatigue on top of that then as well, such as tackling and grappling, and then all of a sudden they're being exposed to these sort of speed zones as well. It's critical that we build our players, build a robustness, so to speak, to the demands of this. And I think the accelerations as well, like you might look at the zones that we were talking about a few moments ago, zone 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and zones 4 and 5 are obviously the big ones that we really need to work on and train on, but so much of the accelerations occur down in the lower zones as well. So we just need the overall picture is being painted here, which is exact. That's it, Paul. Yeah.
Great stuff. Okay, the last one we're going to talk on in relation to football and the numbers in football again. And again, I hope you can get an understanding of what we're doing, trying to paint a picture of the demands, the running performance of the players, what we're seeing in studies that are performed on a scientific basis. Okay, so the last one is the fatigue effect of a match on a player. So what we've done here is we've compared the first half total distance to the second half total distance. All right. And then secondly, then we've looked at the first half and second half on the high end speed. So what we can see here on the left hand side, the total distance is in the first half, the players performed 2,950 meters of total distance. And then in the second half, there was approximately a 200-meter decrease, which isn't a lot. OK, and then in the second half, or if we look at the high speed and the very high speed running, which is the high speed is blue and the very high speed is, the high speed is on the left and the first half is blue and the second half is orange. And then the second half is on the right, or the very high speed is on the right and second half is, or first half is blue, second half is orange. Sorry, I'm confusing myself altogether. You'll see that there was approximately a 50-meter drop in high speed running and only approximately a 10-meter drop in very high speed running. So again, what this is telling us is that the players that they studied across under 15, under 18 club and county, they're pretty well conditioned for the demands of the game. All right. So either we can expose them and press them to go higher and more intense, or else we've nailed it and they're doing the exact amount of running at high intensity they need and they're well conditioned to be able to maintain that solid running performance. So
just coming in, Paul, just to coincide with your point there, Aisling just comes in to say, when doing this type of training, obviously in game situations, the players aren't running in straight lines. So how would we recommend this in training? And that question came in just as we were talking about the max speed and in the previous slide.
Yeah, so Aisling, we're really going to delve really deep into this next week when we actually are focusing on speed, max speed accelerations. But to answer your question tonight, what we'd encourage is we try and train or expose the player to these speed sections in their truest state. So actually doing straight line running so we can get their bar to be as high as possible. So then when we train everything below that, so that could be curved running, that could be multi-directional running or anything like that, that their bar is higher. Generally, when we're looking at something like that, the distance that the lads, or the speed the lads performed, 31 kilometers an hour, they definitely would have been running a straight line there. There'd be no way that they could do a curved run or there'd be agility involved in that speed. So that would be the example of the half back breaking forward, cruising up the line, the wing forward, seeing that there's the half back is out of position and then making a lung busting sprint back to cover the position of the wing back, and the midfielder sprinting through the middle of the field trying to get onto an end of a ball. So they be very much like a line breaking kind of situation where they're really opening up the legs, max velocity, off we go, put the burners on. And the whole point of that and kind of talking about max velocity is if we don't expose players, or if they only get that exposure maybe once every 3, 4, 5 games, that's a recipe for hamstring injuries. Like, you know, they're just going to pop if they're not getting that exposure and they're not used to that, and then the player turns it on and he hasn't given them that exposure. They're just going to get injured. Okay, so they're not able to deal with that demand. So that's why it's important that we are aware of the speeds they have to travel and that we expose them to those speeds in trainings or in situations like that. But very good question, and we'll delve deeper into that next week as well. So this is the end of the football section. So the key areas we talked about was total distance, how that total distance is made up through the different percentage of game time. Secondly, and the second slide where we went into high speed running, very high speed running, and how that's made up of sprints, max velocity, and accelerations. And then the last one on the fatigue effect, or whether it is there or not. Okay, so that's kind of giving us a running performance of the players performing at under 18 and under 15 football across different levels. Okay, so nextly we're going to go on to hurling. And Mick's going to take over with the hurling. He's going to give a very similar description or similar slides, and we'll talk through that bit.
Yeah, perfect, Paul. Thanks. So, yeah, so pretty much just moving on then, Paul, if you want to go on to the next slide. And basically what we're going to just get you to do here, guys, I understand that the video mightn't be of the best quality, but the point we're trying to make is just as you're observing the games as best as they play, hopefully they do play somewhat for you. We're just getting you to observe them through the eyes of athletic development for the purpose of this evening, okay? So just have a little look, and especially after the information and the data that has been given in relation to the football, now that we have a little bit more of a knowledge of what we're looking for when we're assessing games, just have a little look at this clip, and again, hopefully it plays. And just through the eyes of athletic development. So whenever you're ready, Paul, if you want to just press play, and we'll keep the fingers crossed. So just on to the next slide then, Paul. So I appreciate that the video may not have played in the way that we would have liked to have, but just what we're trying to get across is just to try and assess and observe games in a different way in relation to athletic development. So in your own time, if you were to YouTube different GEA clips and watch them in your own time, have a little look now that you have the information on the zones and see, can you identify players moving from zone 1 into a zone 2 and then going back to a zone 1 and then all of a sudden going up to a zone 4 and then going into a really high zone into a high 5. So that's what we're going for in relation to the videos. We're just trying to get you to maybe analyze and assess the games through the eyes of athletic development in order for us to plan and prescribe athletic development strategies going forward. So that's the idea behind the videos. So we can just go on to the next slide, Paul.
Yeah, Mickey, just to add on that, because a lot of us are very aware that like we're being encouraged to do small-sided games or game-based training all the time. Okay, do our small-sided games, game-based training, do they replicate the high-low nature of the matches? Okay, so is it 4 minutes or 3 minutes flat out in a box where you're going 100 miles an hour? Okay, which will get you fit, but it's going to get you fit at you'll be pretty fast and you'll be able to maintain that. Or do we, particularly in the hurling setting, do we need to be able to actually come right down and then get right up there when the ball is near us? Do you know? So if we watch that video again, and we'll send this out to you, you can see that there's a lot of low intensity, and then when the ball is near you, you get right up there, full on, full contact. Do you know? So it's nearly creating more of an opportunity to recover in training is a thing that we need to get after.
And just if you can get that particular clip and have a little look at Walter Walsh, we were watching it today, and his movement off the ball is just phenomenal. But in your own time, if you can have a little look through it. So the study that we took for the hurling side is from Dr. Damien Young. It's across an intercounty minor team, which is interesting on this study is it's across 3 seasons. So it's a really, really good input to have across the 3 seasons. Again, physiological profiles were taken and GPS and heart rate was taken. So we can move on to the next slide, Paul. So similar to the football section, guys, we recorded total distance. Okay, so as you can see, and Damien has compared under 21 and under 17 to the very left of the graph, and the total distance is quite similar between the 2 ages. Again, in similarity with football, the middle 8 positions are covering more distance, while the 2 inside forward lines are covering slightly less. But the interesting fact point here is the under 17 team average is actually more than the football average. So the football average being 5,731 meters and the hurling average being 6,483 meters. So it's an interesting observation of the study. So just on to the next one. So then again, coinciding with our zones in what we were discussing, this is the important nuggets of information that we have here is what are we actually doing over this total distance. So again, the large proportion of the distance is performed in zones 1, 2, and 3. Now we've already highlighted that very important things happen in zones 1, 2, and 3. Okay, there's recovery, there's accelerations, there's decelerations, and then when you get up into the high intensity, then as you can see, it's quite up in zone 5. It's quite high. It's 272 is the average, whereas in the football it was 198 in the very high speed. Well, this is an interesting point here then. On zone 4 on the hurling, which is the high speed running, it's 583, whereas in the football, the high speed running was 851. So just to have that contrast there is an interesting observation that effectively speaking, what we're trying to say is the hurling in zone 5 is really, really, really high intensity, and there's quite a substantial amount covered in that zone. So just on to the next slide, Paul. So when we're looking at positional then, guys, as we can see, we can all identify that the middle 8 are covering more distance in the high intensity running. But if you really look at the graph and you look at the orange section on the left-hand side, all the lines from full forward, half forward, midfield, half back, and full back, all the lines are covering very similar distances in that very high speed running. So that's the sprints over 22 kilometers an hour. So that's a really interesting point that all the lines, there's difference in the distance that's covered between the lines, but the high intensity zone 5 running is actually quite similar across all the lines. And then as Paul has already said in relation to the football, these sprints aren't performed in one effort. With the hurling, it's the same amount of sprints of 18, but the distance is slightly lower. The average is about 15. Okay, whereas in the football, the distance of the sprints were reaching up to 21. In hurling, the highest is 16. Okay, so it's an interesting observation on the shorter distance covered at these speeds in hurling. Again, we looked at max speed. So when we look at the max speed, again, not as high as our football counterparts, but it's still extremely high for a field sport game. 29 kilometers. It's an extremely fast pace for our players to be exposed to, and we've already discussed the importance of exposing them to them speeds. Another addition to this study that we got was the deceleration in conjunction with the acceleration. So as you can see here, the deceleration, so as Paul has already defined, acceleration is an increase in speed, whereas a deceleration is a decrease in speed in its simplest terms. And as you can see, the numbers are very, very high. So we have 127 accelerations and then alongside 120 decelerations. And as we've already discussed, these can happen throughout the multiple zones in changes of pace going forward. And obviously, when we think about this in real terms, what does an acceleration and a deceleration mean? In its simplest terms, if you think about the full forward and he or she is just jogging out towards the D, and then all of a sudden they make a break out to the left for a run, that's an acceleration. Then they decelerate and then they cut and they move to the right. So therefore, that's how this data could be obtained. It's a run out to the left, increase the tempo, decrease it, and then we head off the other direction. For example, how to combine both of them. So there's the data that we collected. And moving on to the next, well, we didn't collect it, we critiqued. And moving on to the next slide then, the fatigue effect of half time in hurling, which is quite interesting here. If you look at the slide on the left-hand side, you can see that the distance covered in the first half was 3,486, whereas the distance in the second half was 3,007. So we are talking about, that's a substantial difference between halves. And if we look over on the right-hand side, if you look over on the right-hand side, the two blue graphs is the high speed, okay, and it also drops off between halves, 329 down to 263. And also the orange, which is very high speed, also drops down from 153 to 121. Now, this left myself and Paul discussing potential reasons why this could have taken place. And a suggestion that we were discussing together could possibly be the fact that the hurlers have been exposed to such high distance in that very high speed zone, over 22 kilometers we've covered, and that being the reason that exposure to that high speed running has influenced extra fatigue on the players is a suggestion that we have. Paul, have you got anything else to add to the fatigue effect within the two halves in the hurling?
Yeah, the other one we were suggesting when we were having a chat about today, and you can see we're enjoying this isolation lockdown. We get to talk about all these studies all the time. But the other one we were talking about today was in relation to hurling compared to football, was when you actually look at the type of training that both sports do. So football, the nature of it, carrying the ball, support play. A lot of the training actually involves a lot of support play, off the shoulder, small-sided games and the likes, where you're actually kind of honing those skills of those support runs. Whereas football or hurling is more a case of you strike to the next zone and then there's a fight for the ball, or you strike into a zone and there's a sharp run to get to the ball. Where there's less of a running game. Now, obviously, if we play a running game tactic, we're going to bring that higher runnings coming into play. But across the board, and I think Damien did his study on Tipperary, and they wouldn't be renowned for a running game. It's actually that nature of the ball getting struck more often in training as well. So they're probably not being exposed to that small-sided game-style situation of runs. So in a situation like this, there could be an argument made to ensure that fatigue doesn't kick in and reduce the ability of the players in the second half. They might need exposure to more running if the small-sided games in their training aren't giving them that exposure. So again, we're going to talk about this more in the weeks to come when we go into conditioning, sprinting and acceleration, decelerations and stuff. So
Paul, just a question there from Sandra coming in. It's very interesting. If you manage both football and hurling teams, should the speed training sprints be different i.e. reps and distance between the two?
No, and again, we're probably going to talk about it a lot more next week, but like this is probably one of the biggest things we're trying to get across in this webinar series is, can we start to treat exposure to speed on its own nearly as one part of the session where we don't try build it into a game and try to build multiple components. So we actually isolate it, treat it in its truest form to let the lads get better at it, and treat it nearly the same way as we have to go out on the pitch and practice striking or kicking off our weak foot. Well, can we actually get better at running? Like, we think about how many sports are in the Olympics that are dedicated to running, and there's pro athletes who actually just get to practice running all the time. We look at how many times a player has the ball in their hand in hurling or football. 80 to 90% of the game is actually running alone without the ball. So it's a big aspect of our game, and an aspect of our game I think we can make huge strides and developments in by giving it a little bit more attention.
And yeah, just to come in on that as well, Paul, that's where the observations on different clips on YouTube, there's any amount of them on YouTube that if you click through them, with the knowledge that we hope we've got across this evening, you will be able to see this type of running happening off the ball, and the importance of having the ability for the players to be able to get into this sort of speed and to be able to sustain it then repeatedly throughout the games.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so that's the end of the stats. Anyone who hates graphs and numbers, you're done with them. Apologies about that. Anyone who likes them, will be sending you over the presentation so you can tear them apart even further if you want. So the next part really is what me, Mick, Kieran and Dave, what we pulled out of those numbers. Okay, so what we found was important to reviewing these papers, and also through reviewing tape and just watching matches and taking our own experience into play. Okay, so the match play demand data influence our training programs. Okay, what is it? So a quick overview. Our games are a stop-start nature. So if anyone, I'm going to direct you here towards the National GA Conference webinar. If anyone has seen it, you'll know what I'm talking about. If you haven't, look for it. So Damien Young, the paper we just reported on there, he gives a presentation on the nature of the nature of play in hurling, but it relates very closely to football. And if you start watching the game through that prism of what he sets up, you're going to get a huge insight into how the game is actually quite stop-start. If we take the example of the first clip we showed you, the 2 minutes at the start of the hurling, the timeline, I took note of it there this morning when I was watching this. So the game got thrown in. The ball knocked around the middle of the park. Connor Brown got it. He made a run through the middle of the pitch and he got fouled on the 19th second. Then TJ Reid stepped over a free. He took 36 seconds to take the free. Then the goalkeeper, Hogan, he took another 15 or 16 seconds to hit out the ball. So between the first 20 seconds, the foul, and then the ball being struck out into play again, there was approximately another minute was gone. So for that 20 seconds, they had a minute rest, the most players. Okay, so it's just being aware of that kind of stop-start nature of the game. What this leads to is a repeated, unpredictable bout of high-intensity exercise. Okay, so what we mean by that is it goes high intensity and it repeats. We don't know when the repeats are going to happen. So you could get hit with 4 high-intensity activities in a row because the ball just came down your side 2-3 times. You made an interception, the ball got cleared, it landed back down you again, you intercepted again, or you had to do a tackle. So we have to be ready for all the demands that it can throw. So we can't say grand, we get loads of time off between each rep. We have to be able to get loads of time off between each rep and maximize when we're on, but we also have to be able to deal with when we're on for a longer time or for more reps in a row. And this is interspersed with light to moderate activity like we spoke about. And that is really the bedding of what allows us to go so fast or so hard or tackle so hard and then come down again and then go again. All right. So you see all the lads doing their 5K runs and 10K runs and stuff like that. They don't really directly correlate across to the game of hurling and football because they're of a same intensity throughout the run. The next one, then the players surf through the different speed zones. So kind of we just go back to that GPS graph that we gave a picture of. You can see that it's continually just bouncing up and down. It'll shoot up to 25 kilometers an hour. It'll come right down to 6. It'll go up to 8. It'll come down to 2. It'll stay up 8, 12, 14. So it's all over the place. We can't really tell you where they are and when they're going to be there. The difference in positions. So we've given you graphs there on each position has a different demand. Okay, the sprint distance is generally 14 to 21 meters in length. Hurling is a little bit shorter, as we said. And also, it actually takes approximately 20 meters to get up to that speed. Okay, and then the last one, there's a huge amount of accelerations and decelerations, and we need to prepare the players for those.
I just think, sorry, Paul, just on one of the points there, I just want to highlight again, the sprint distance between 14 and 21 meters. So when we're prescribing, we're going to go into this in a lot more detail next week, but just as Paul said there, it takes up to 20, 25 meters to get to that speed to perform the sprint at that distance then. So just something just to highlight on then as well.
Yeah, definitely. And then finally then summarize. And this is really, it's been teed up, so you had the answers before you came into the webinar, but really I hope we painted a bit of the why behind it, so we don't blindly just take on, well, you should do this and this and this and this. We're kind of trying to give you the picture or the numbers to paint the picture anyways. So what we're going to be doing then is we're prioritizing acceleration and speed. So when we watch the game and we see that overview, the important activities and the high speed activities happen around the ball, and they're the game breaking activities. So speed is the critical number that we record before all scoring actions or all scoring opportunities. The next one, as you said, it was in one of the comments there a minute ago,
yeah.
lateral side shuffling and all different change of direction. So we're not competing in a single track lane sport. We need to be able to change direction, move one way, cut, backpedal, reverse, go all different ways. And also the other one, which is agility, which is even more important. Okay, so the agility is actually the ability to react quickly to a change of direction and deceleration, as well as being able to do it. Okay, so it's that reaction skill as well. The next one is being conditioned to sustain the demands of the game. So actually being able to maintain as many of these accelerations and speed as required throughout the match, the agility and change direction that's required during the match, and being able to sustain them for the entirety of the match, or at least understanding where the players lie, and when they fall off and they can't maintain those scores, we're aware, well, he's coming out, or he needs more work in that direction. And then the last one, and we're going to have a good chat on this one. This will be webinar 5. It's going to be about pulling all this together and how the other aspects off the field are going to influence how well the players adapt to these exposures to training. So stuff like rest, recovery, sleep, hydration, load management, training during exam periods, dealing with a player who's just kind of gone off the boil and all this kind of stuff. So we're going to try have a little bit of a talk on that as well. And again, we're open to any questions or anything you don't think that we touched on. This is a very...
We have two there, Paul, in relation to position training. So there's rugby has specific training for specific positions. For the length of time that we have our players, it's hard to do this. And then another question fairly similar is in relation to would it make sense that we tailor speed work for positions? So the two there, what I'd probably recommend is, again, we deliver the same training for, let's start taking speed and acceleration as skills and agility, change direction, deceleration as skills. And let's nearly say the same way as we want to work on our pickup, our shooting, our hand pass, and whatever it is, we've also built in a block for tonight is going to be an acceleration speed session. Thursday night's going to be an agility change of direction session. So we only are asking you to build in 10 minutes of activity dedicated to this. And then in relation to the different positions and how they need the exposure to different activities, what we're going to find is manipulating the size of the pitch for the small sided games is going to have more of a relevance for the different positions. So if we have a very small pitch,
the defenders and inside forwards are going to need more accelerations and decelerations. They're going to need more contact because that's what they get exposed to in the match. So the small side of pitch is going to suit them. And then as we extend out the pitch into medium and into large size pitches, that's going to expose more opportunity to get into max velocity positions or close to them, more high speed running. And that's what the midfield or the middle eight require. So there's kind of simple tweaks we can do even through our small sided games or through our game based training that will work alongside our proper GA15 warm up leading into a kind of a skilled based acceleration or agility change of direction block, and that'll tee us up fairly nicely. And then as we get into the older ages, if required, we can add in or sprinkle in that little bit of conditioning specific work if required as well.
That's perfect, Paul. And just a comment there on the lads weren't too far out years ago with the fartlek training.
Pardon?
The lads weren't too far out years ago with the fartlek training.
No. It's all, everything comes back into fashion, so it's all coming around in circle. And we'd probably put a little bit more structure on it, and we probably can get the same adaptation from fartlek that we can get through a small-sided game. And this is a key thing that me and Mick will be harping on throughout each of the weeks is when we say we want you to isolate acceleration and speed, it's because we haven't figured out a different way that you can actually develop these truly in a game. But any chance we get to develop anything in the game, we want you to do the game, because that's going to, as we go back to the tourist card and the TPP model, that's going to develop your decision making, your team play, your technical skills and the likes of that. But sometimes we just need to put down the hurley or the football and really just get better at moving.
Yeah, and then just on that as well, just my last input on it then as well is that in relation to the small side of games, as Paul has discussed, and in relation to size of the pitches, if we decrease the size of the pitch, we're given more exposures to accelerating and decelerating in that sense as well. But we're going to be going into that in a lot more depth over the next couple of weeks. So yeah, thank you very much for tuning in, guys.
Yeah, any more questions? We'll hang on there for about 3-4 minutes, and if you don't, so then what's going to happen as well, lads? I think we updated the slides, but I must have uploaded the wrong model. Acceleration speed is going to be next Friday night. Then we're going to be on to agility, change of direction, deceleration the following Friday. Then we're going on to conditioning the following Friday, and then we'll be finished up with maximizing adaptation as the following Friday. Again, in the meantime, if there's any area that you don't think we're going to be focusing on that you'd like to be addressed, drop me a mail. I know some people put in comments into the boxes already. As we go through each of the boxes of the registration form, as we go through each of the sections, again, if we don't answer your questions, make sure that we address them as we're going along. We don't want to leave anything behind. Hopefully, it should become more clear over the weeks, and we think we've a good product here anyway. So really enjoyed this evening.
Just one question coming in there about the GA15 warm-up and the inclusion of the ball. And yeah, totally, yeah, we can include the ball, yeah. Obviously, we have the principles of the GA15. We have to activate the muscles, mobilize the joints, and then replicate what's to follow. But yeah, definitely we can use the football or the sliotar throughout the warm-up. Personally, when I'm designing a warm-up for the majority for all teams, I'll have the football included. I'll be interspersing the football with the different principles of the GA15. So I would base my warm-up off the GA15. I would use them principles, but I would definitely use the football and just trying to keep it creative, try to be creative to keep it from being stale and being repetitive on the players as much as we can.
Yeah, and that's a key thing, Mick. I'll probably just definitely make sure everyone understands that when I'm talking about acceleration comes in early in the session, it's after they've been warmed up through the GA15, and the warm up through the GA15 with the ball can be a raised style model, so it's perfect for that, where we're building in that technical capacity, hurling our football, and we're gradually increasing their temperature so they're ready and there's less risk of injury. So that's essential. So it's nearly making sure that they're fully warmed up before we tackle any of these running accelerations or speed or agility or any of these ones. That's a key aspect. But we're going to, and that's probably a key thing tuning in each week, we're going to have practical examples and session plans of what we'd be asking for you to integrate if you're interested in this stuff. Okay?
Yeah, perfect. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much, everyone. We'll see you next week. Okay.
Hey guys, thank you.
Bye. Bye. Bye.
Thanks, guys.